Well, as we look at ISIS and we look at kind of what's going on with regard to terrorism, obviously they're using social media and other mechanisms to try to radicalize people where they are right now, whether that be in the United States or places around the world. I do believe that it's going to require U.S. leadership not only to step up and create additional pressure, building an international community, because we need to defeat ISIS not only militarily, we need to defeat them psychologically as well. This is something that is growing in the fear of many of the constituents, not just in the 10th district, but around the country. And so we see what's going on, whether it be what happened in Orlando, obviously an enormous tragedy, or other San Bernardino or other places around the United States, but it's also in places like Paris and others as well. So this is something that's not going away. It's an enormous problem, and it's going to require the U.S. leadership. I believe it's going to require us to put an international coalition together to actually defeat ISIS and to try to make sure that we are putting pressure on others to follow suit with us. On refugees, so which refugees? Syrian refugees, because it's a little bit different on refugees, because we have to really do the balance, because we are a beacon of hope for folks around the world, right? We want to make sure that those that are being persecuted for religious or political reasons have an ability to come to the United States. The difficulty that we have with the Syrian refugees, and what I've said is we need to hit the pause button until our intelligence agencies are able to verify that they are going to pose no threat to the United States. And one of the reasons why we need to do that is because ISIS has said that we are going to infiltrate the refugees and put soldiers in with them. We've seen that happen right now in Germany and other places. And so I do believe that what we need to do, because there's no database on the other side, there's nothing to verify who these individuals are. And so in talking to Secretary Johnson and to Director Comey and others, they're saying we can't certify them. We have no idea who these folks are. So I do believe that we need to have safe zones for them to be able to be in, again, so that they're closer to home, they're not making life-threatening journeys out there. And that's part of the foreign aid budget that we have today, is so that we are sending hundreds of millions of dollars into places like Jordan, so that they can actually deal with this humanitarian crisis that's going on right now. I mean, certainly we need to have folks that are either on-the-ground intelligence assets out there that can help verify who these individuals are. Are they part of a terrorist network? Those are things that are going to take some time to put together, but I do believe that we have an obligation to make sure that we're protecting the citizens of our country. Now, again, refugees from all over the world, by all means, but we don't have that right now in Syria, and that's a very real problem. Listen, I think there's a number of issues with regard to Syria that are problematic, and certainly when the president draws a red line in Syria, saying that this is the red line, I want our president to succeed. Right? And so when the president says this, he needs to mean it, because not only did they cross the red line, they trampled on it back and forth. And that sent a very clear signal, not only to our allies, but to our enemies as well. And I think it created a far more dangerous situation. So I do think that that was a problem, and wish that had gone a different direction with regard to that red line. Even if he didn't say it, it would have been better.
Let me start with the first responsibility of our government, which I believe is to keep our nation safe, Americans safe here at home, and Americans safe abroad. And that means taking on a list of threats, but high on that list is dealing with the threat of international terrorism. And you talk about international terrorism, there's no greater threat right at the moment than whether you call it Islamic State, ISIL, ISIS, Daesh. We have to address it. Now, I believe there are four things we have to do in addressing ISIS. Number one is addressing it at its core, at its root, which is in the space between what used to be Syria and Iraq. And that means working with the people in the region, right now, especially the people living under the thumb of ISIS, to rise up and take control of their own lives, working with our allies, and from our own military standpoint, providing close military support, providing training, exactly what we're doing to try to defeat ISIS on the ground where they are. But ISIS has also branched out into satellites in Africa, satellites in Asia, and we have to cut those off and defeat them there as well. This third thing we have to do is address the fact that ISIS has been a draw for radicalized militants from around the world. Virtually every country in the world has sent people into Syria to get training, to become further radicalized, whatever the issue. And those people have already started, we have seen, go home, whether it's home into Europe where you've seen terrorist acts, or trying to get here into the United States. And we have to identify those people, as I talked about earlier, and thwart their ability to return home and cause harm. And the fourth thing, and Mr. Dold talked a bit about this, is the social media reach of ISIL. They have proven very deft at this, of radicalizing people never traveling to Syria, people in their home country, including the United States, who are reading their propaganda, are buying into their distortions of Islam, and finding motivation for carrying out acts against people, and we've seen that obviously here in the United States, and we have to work to address that. That requires a comprehensive strategy, and that's going to involve multiple agencies, but it also requires leadership at the top. And I am hopeful that Hillary Clinton, as our next president, will extend that leadership. You talked about refugees. This may be one of the areas where Bob Dold and I have, again, a fundamental philosophical difference. My grandmother came here as a refugee in the early 1900s. She was fleeing the pogroms of Russia. She was 5 years old. The interesting part of the story is they were in England waiting passage on a ship. My uncle took ill, thankfully, because the ship was the Titanic, and they waited a week not to go on that ship. But they came to this country, a country that welcomed them with open arms. They moved across the country and ended up in Colorado, where they were able to have their life. And my 5-year-old grandmother, grew up, married, had 6 children of her own. We had 18 children in my generation, which is now 30-some children in the next generation. All of whom are working to contribute in a positive way to our country. My grandmother's story is everybody's story. Everyone in this room, I suspect, has a similar story. So as a nation, we cannot turn our back on the refugees, whether they be from Syria or anywhere else. Now again, as I started with this, the responsibility of our government is to keep Americans safe. We have a very intensive refugee vetting process. It takes at least 18 months to get through that process. And we're not letting anyone in who hasn't cleared that process. But the situation Mr. Dold talks about, refugees in Syria without papers, is true whether they're coming from Yemen or from Nigeria or many places around the world. Okay? Our system, the bad guys are going to try to defeat our systems all the time, which is why we have to always be investing on improving our systems. That's true today, and it's going to be true tomorrow and 10 years from now. But to say we turn our back on refugees, especially from the greatest refugee crisis in our generation. And Mr. Dold last fall took it even a step worse. He said we should allow Christians in and put a hold on Muslims. To put a religious test on
never
refugees.
said that.
You said
I never said that we should put a hold on Muslims.
You said we should allow Christians in. If I misspoke, I'm sorry. Okay. To me, I don't care what religion someone is. My grandmother was a Jewish family fleeing the pogroms of Tsarist Russia. It doesn't matter whether it's Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Zoroastrian, people who are fleeing oppression, people who know that if they don't get out from where they are going to face certain death. This nation has been a beacon of hope to people for 2.5 centuries. I hope we never give up on that beacon.
And we never should. Absolutely. This is what we said before.
Okay.